picture that you're a French mortician in the 1880s and you're looking at the body of a drowned 16-year-old girl. What is your reaction to this? You got it. I believe in you.
Oh, wow. How fleeting life is. But, payday.
The correct answer is, this is the perfect encapsulation of beauty.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unbelievable, the podcast where today we are at our season finale, and my oh my, Luis, it has been quite a journey. This is season 3, so it's kind of like the tiebreaker because you won season 1 and I won season 2, and now you have won season 3, so I guess maybe you're the ultimate champion, but either way, I really enjoyed doing this season with you. How's it been for you?
It's been quite a wild ride. I think we accidentally stumbled upon a problem when we started this show and had only ideas in mind and not the concept itself. By having seasons that can be longer or shorter depending on how good we are at doing this. and that's all to say, this has been our longest season so far. Typically, the seasons tended to align with the year we've been doing this podcast, or maybe even shorter. However, this was probably like a year and a bit in the making, man. It's been a wild, wild ride throughout the whole time. And it brings me much pleasure to say that I'm still just great at this, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, you would think that I would have better than 50-50 odds because, like, I could just flip a coin every episode and guess, but evidently that is not the case. But either way, yeah, I've had a lot of fun. It has been a really long season. Like, when I was doing some research on the first episodes of this season in preparation for this, I don't know, I was just amazed at how long ago some of it felt. And maybe also at the same time, because we've been doing this show for so long, it all starts to blend together at a certain point. Mm-hmm. Like, I was thinking of episodes in season 2 that I thought were from this season, but it's all been for the good. Yeah. It's all been for the best because I've definitely had a fun time doing it. Luis, is there an episode that you hosted and that I hosted that stick out for you from the season? Do you have a favorite?
Listen, I will start with being self-indulgent. I really, really, really liked the story about the tequila turbine car. I really find that really good. Or actually, no, let me change that. Mongolian super horses and the latrine disaster.
Oh, okay.
Mongolian super horses and the latrine disaster. I cannot believe that I found such a ridiculous story like the latrine disaster just out there in the world. And then me deciding to come up with a story about horses that are ready to kill at any moment. I'm very proud of myself for that. That said, Kurt, I really, really like your story about Angel's Glow. I think that was probably the opener for the season. And it's probably one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, the very first story. Wow.
This story is very special to me because, interestingly, it's one of the shortest episodes we've had on this show so far. Because it is just 45 minutes long.
Really?
Like to the dot, 45 minutes long. But it is so condensed. And there's just so much information packed into this episode. And yet it's still incredibly engaging. And not just that, it's the episode that genuinely scared me for a second. Because of course, we're talking about Angel's Glow, about this weird phenomenon that happened.
Yeah, glowing bacteria that was in Civil War soldiers' wounds. It acted as some sort of natural antibiotic.
And it's the story that genuinely scared me, Kurt, because toward the end you said that you actually called a couple of Civil War battlefields. And I don't remember at this point if that was real or fake, but when you said that, I said, oh man, I am not prepared for this episode. This is not going to be good for me, frankly, because for those of you that know this or may not know this, I do a lot of my research on a whim. A lot of it is very well researched, but sometimes I panic. At least at the end of season 2, I used to panic sometimes on the day off and come up with something. Sometimes it will work, sometimes it didn't. So that's the moment that that is the moment when I realized, oh no, I have to step up my game a little bit. I have to do the same type of research and commitment to the bit that Kurt is doing for the entirety of this season. And lo and behold, I guess it worked.
Yeah, seemingly has. It's really funny that you say that because, as I know, you're the one who majored in journalism. So I feel like probably when I did that, it was me trying to reach the level of research that I assumed you were doing. So maybe we both can slack off is the good news. But I also was going to say about you picking your favorite episode of the latrine disaster and the Mongolian super horses. Not only was the latrine disaster a great story, but it was pretty bold of you to lie to me about horses or horse-related topics. Because as we were actually talking about before we started this recording, I kind of introduced you to horse riding and taught you. I would assume most of your knowledge about horses. So that's like something that would be, I don't know, pretty risky for you to lie to me about, and I believe you pulled it off. I think you might have fooled me that
I did fool you. I mean, for those of you that don't know, Kurt made me into the horse girl I am today. This is very true. I wouldn't have the love for horses
I
have today unless it was for Kurt. But yeah, no, I think that's where I started putting a lot of my marbles in, is in trying to recognize what you like, trying to get into your head more than anything else.
Well, that's nice. For me, I think my favorite episode that I did was the Boneless Viking and the Goat Gland Doctor, just because I've thought about Dr. John Brinkley implanting people with goat testicles so much since we recorded that episode. I just feel like it's one of the things that's going to stick with me. And also, as we kind of talked about in the episode, like there were side characters from the story that established hospitals in Chicago where you used to live and I currently live, and other things where we had kind of like bumped into this story during our lives. So I guess it just keeps coming up for me, but it's also just an insane story. My favorite story from you was the Hangman's Ape and the Elephant Execution, because, this true story, as sad as this is, we're talking about an elephant executed by hanging in the middle of Kentucky. Yep. What an insane scene. But then the other side of it is I can never forget this story in which the hangman has a pet monkey who decides when they pull the lever to execute the criminals, and when they're going to do the execution, everybody starts chanting the monkey's name, Pats, Pats, Pats. It was just a really fun story to listen to, as depressing as both of them were. So I guess, those are really the stories that stick with me from that season.
And say what you will about either of our investigation or research skills, Kurt, but I think one thing is for certain: we have gotten way better at storytelling, to the point where I find that regardless of which story is true, whether you're telling it or I'm telling it, I just have a very good time listening to you tell the story. I think we've gotten more compelling and engaging when it comes to telling stories, even ridiculous things as, I don't know, like you said, making up the fact that a monkey used to be an executioner. I think much like drag queen story times, they should bring us to local preschools and we can tell them about epidemics, or something like that.
People need to know about the Goat Gland Doctor.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to know. But, I think you do make a good point, and this is kind of related to you talking about how I called the Shiloh National Park to try to get some questions answered about my Angel's Glow story. We actually do really try to go out of our way to make sure that whatever we're saying in the true story is actually really true. I mean, I think, part of like the enjoyment out of how wild some of this history is that we've gone and done the fact checking to determine that, like, it seems like this is the case. It's not just like potentially mythology or one person's account that's disputed.
Yeah.
And this was kind of a funny story because I had researched the Angel's Glow pretty extensively and had like most of the notes written for this true story about how there was this glowing bacteria that did this kind of miraculous cure. And then I called this national park, and I think I had some pretty like basic questions about like the dates or how many soldiers were involved in this battle. And immediately the answer I got was, this did not happen at all. This is all fictitious, which turned out to be correctly the case. So that was a weird little situation where I got to tell you a story that is like commonly written about. I didn't really make it up, but it still was false. But I think that's going to be something that kind of comes up later or maybe a few times in this episode about how we really do go out of our way to make sure that whatever we're telling you is like at least 99% accurate.
It may not be true, but it certainly is accurate.
But with that being said, Luis, what have you brought for show and tell today? Let's do some celebrating. You know, we've got quizzes, true tales, games, whatever else. We're just going to talk about some wild history, celebrating what a long and amazing season it's been. So, Luis, what have you brought for us?
Okay, Kurt. Well, I'm going to start off with a quick real history. You know, at the end of the day, I really started to brag about our storytelling there. So I'm going to do just that to try to prove ourselves one last time.
Okay.
But as we tend to do during these season finales, we try to give you some real stories where most of the time during the season, we kind of repeat the phrase, God, I wish that was real. And now we get to tell some of those real stories that we essentially omitted from telling each other in the last year and a bit.
Right.
So, Kurt, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, how about this? Let me start this way. I became known early on in this podcast for talking about two things, and that is Maximilian of Habsburg, the second Mexican emperor, and also the Aztec Empire, right? Those are two things that I became very much well known about. And not just that, but ever since we started this podcast, I have become a history communicator on social media. And so now part of my job is to tell amazing stories about Mexican history. And so I'm going to be taking one of those to share with you today that, funny enough, brings together, Kurt, my passion for the Aztec Empire and also of Maximilian of Habsburg.
Ooh, wow. I can't believe we haven't heard this before.
No, Curtis, because it's very near and dear to my heart. But I, as you can probably tell, have refrained from sharing stories about my homeland and of Maximilian of Habsburg because you know I know a lot about this. So I've tried to keep away. I've tried to be restrained. But today, I don't care. We're going to be talking about Moctezuma's headdress. Now, right off the bat, Kurt, do you know anything about Moctezuma's headdress?
It's about his headdress? No, that's so specific.
Okay, Kurt.
Yeah, I could speculate, but no, I don't know anything.
Interestingly, if you are in Mexico or have studied a little bit of Mexican history, or generally if you're into Mexican pop culture, a big item that's talked about commonly is Moctezuma's headdress. And what do I mean by this? During the time when Hernan Cortez was visiting with intents to conquer, he came across different emissaries from Moctezuma, who, if you don't know, was the emperor of the Mexica Empire, or what we would know today as the Aztec Empire. Hernan Cortez would come across these emissaries, and Moctezuma, in an effort to try to get this guy to leave, he pulled a Europe on Hitler right before the World War, which is let's give him what he wants, and he might just cede.
Oh, not the appeasement policy.
Naturally, Hernan Cortez and his men loved gold, and all they wanted was gold and riches. And so Moctezuma said, "Hey, let's give them all the gold they want." Of course, this did not help Moctezuma's cause. Rather, it pushed Cortez and his men forward onto Mexico City and destroyed everyone and killed Moctezuma in the process. But one of the things that he would be receiving as gifts were headdresses. Now, Kurt, headdresses are not status symbols for the Mexica people, much like headdresses are for Native Americans in what is now the United States. Right? So you can imagine big headdresses for Native Americans in the U.S. That was not the case here. In Mesoamerica, especially the Mexica Empire, they would wear some sort of crowns, but they would also have some sorts of ceremonial headdresses or even ceremonial capes made out of emeralds, jewels, stones, precious stones, and feathers, bird feathers. Now, one of these items that was supposedly given to Hernan Cortez was a huge headdress that is made of gold, rubies, sapphires, and then lined with long green quetzal bird feathers.
Oh.
And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous piece of art. I will show you a picture of this, and I would like you to quickly describe what this is.
Ooh, we've got some very vibey colors here. I feel like Moctezuma would have really appreciated some neon lights. But yeah, I guess there's like an inner band of, it looks like maybe some beads or something that's woven together that's blue. And then it's got some outer bands like surrounding that with a little crown piece. And then it's all these reeds or feathers sticking out from it that are like bluish green. This is really a fashion statement piece. I'm big into this.
And now, here's the thing, Kurt. We know about Moctezuma's headdress. It is a real thing that exists because you're seeing a picture of it. Take a guess where this thing is currently.
Oh, no. I don't want to. Is it in Spain?
No, Kurt. It's not in Spain. It is part of Vienna's Ethnographic Museum.
What? It's in Austria?
It is in Austria.
What is going on
So
here?
Moctezuma's headdress is in Austria right now. And that is one of the big pieces of Mexican propaganda that you'll hear if you're just Mexican or have been, listening to Mexican pop culture, is why the hell is Moctezuma's headdress in Vienna? Well, here's a couple things, Kurt. So this is thought to be a gift that was given to Hernan Cortez.
A gift. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it came back to Spain with him, and it was given to the king at the time. I believe it was Philip II, and it was given to the king at the time, and it was somewhere in Spain for hundreds of years, and we don't know what happened, but a trade was made that ended up with the Austrian royal family.
Wow.
And that's why Moctezuma's headdress is now in Vienna. Now, interestingly, Kurt, it's not even a headdress, for starters.
Okay.
There's some debate around this, but some archaeologists have said that it's actually just a cape.
It's a cape?
And it probably didn't belong to Moctezuma.
What?
Yeah, it could be a cape. Because what you see, that headdress, or if you look at a picture of it, lengthwise, it's about like 2 meters long.
Right.
And like top-wise, it's like 1.5 meters. So it very easily could be a cape. That was something that was worn in ceremonies with Mexica people. But the problem is that Mexico for years has been asking Vienna for Moctezuma's headdress back. And Vienna, or the Austrian government, has always refused. And there's a very specific reason for this. Because, Kurt, if you are familiar with your Mexican history, and at this point I hope you are, Mexico in 1862 to 1867 had an emperor. That emperor was named Maximilian of Habsburg. And where was Maximilian of Habsburg from, Kurt?
Austria, baby.
He was from Vienna. Yes, indeed. He was a Viennese man. He was a wiener, as they would say in German. And so the Austrian government to this day is still kind of pissed with Mexico that we not only had an Austrian emperor, but also that Benito Juarez ended up killing him. So, and revoking him of all royal titles. So Vienna or Austria has agreed, hey, we will give you Moctezuma's headdress back. However, we are asking for Maximilian's royal carriage back in exchange.
Oh, wow. They're bargaining.
They are bargaining. They're saying, you give us this carriage, which is currently located in Mexico's Museum of National History, or National Museum of History, which is located in Mexico City's Chapultepec Castle, formerly known as Maximilian's Castle. But currently, this carriage still sits there. But here's one caveat, Kurt. The carriage was made in Italy for the Mexican emperors. So much so that it has the Mexican eagle eating a snake atop of a cactus. The problem is, it's that it's wearing a crown, so it's the royal symbol of the Mexican Empire.
We're getting pedantic here, Austria. I don't know, dude. It was built in Italy. I don't know.
And not just that, Mexican authorities and Mexican archaeologists are saying, This is Mexican. This has been Mexican all along. It never belonged to Austria or to Maximilian of Habsburg. It belonged to the Mexican emperor. Whereas Moctezuma's headdress was not only just not a headdress, but a cape, but also it probably was never Moctezuma's. It was probably just custom made for Hernan Cortez to be given as a gift. So Moctezuma, it never belonged to him. He gave it as a gift to Cortez, who eventually did whatever he wanted with his gift. Because, my mom always said it's bad manners to return a gift.
True.
Very
true.
So what do he do? It belongs to whoever Cortez gave it to, which in this case was the King of Spain and then eventually the kings of Austria. So technically, we as a country, Mexico, has more claim to Maximilian's carriage than we even have to Moctezuma's headdress, which, by the way, is not a headdress.
Wow.
And it doesn't stop there, Kurt. It doesn't end there,
no, please,
because there's
please.
a little bit of
That's
gossip.
so much already.
Archaeological gossip. There have been some studies done in the last 5 to 10 years that say that Moctezuma's headdress is made of all organic material, including bird feathers, and it's so old that even making it travel could destroy it. To the point where even if it gets put in an airplane, the simple vibrations of the airplane could destroy this whole thing. So we really cannot move it. However, Kurt,
how is there more?
I don't believe this. And this is now my own personal gossip, but I believe that the Mexican government hired scientists to come up with a phony excuse as to why the Moctezuma headdress cannot travel, just so we don't have to give back Maximilian's carriage. Because I'm sure there are some ways to mitigate vibration from an airplane. I mean, it is 2025 for crying out loud, right? That is the story of Moctezuma's headdress, which is not a headdress, it's a cape, that is currently, to this day, you can still visit it in the Ethnographic Museum of Vienna. And for all of those of you who live in the American continent or Mexico, if you don't want to make the trip to Austria, and let's be honest, why would you? You can actually go to the Mexican Anthropological Museum. Funny enough, the same place where the Aztec Sunstone is held at. And right across from the Aztec Sunstone, there is a perfect replica of Moctezuma's headdress. So if you don't want to travel too far, you can stay in Mexico City and see Moctezuma's headdress, which is not a headdress and it didn't belong to Moctezuma.
Wow, this is such a complex conflict between, not only just like the questions about who does a thing belong to if it was made in this country for the purpose of this country occupying this country, but also just the fact that we don't know for sure if this headdress belonged to Moctezuma, if it was even a headdress. I mean, I feel like you kind of got to figure that out first, because the difference between the headdress you make for like some random guy who showed up in a boat versus, your ruler, I don't know the specifics of like what they considered Moctezuma, but I would assume something like, chosen by the gods or close to that. Like, you're going to put a lot more work into that headdress / cape / whatever it is. So, man, this is a lot to sift through. I got to say, Luis, it's tough for Mexico to be having to deal with, like, our Constitution is over here. Do we have the original copy? They got our Makwa whittles taken to this country. Our headdress / cape is in Austria. It's a lot to put up with.
It is a lot to put up with, but you know what? I love that those are the types of issues plaguing Mexico right now. I mean, sure, we have constitutional crises going on. We have a crisis going on in the judicial branch of our government at the moment. There are weird constitutional reforms going on, but what do people care about?
Moctezuma's
headdress. And it's so much fun. Like I've always argued that maybe bread and circus is fine for a culture, and we have the best circus in town, honestly, and that is anthropological fights and archaeological fights between scientists, archaeologists, and two countries that really shouldn't care about each other, which is Mexico and Austria, and I love that.
I feel like I'm getting a better understanding of it now, because before I was like, man, this is a lot of thinking to have to do about, like, who morally owes who to what, and what was it worth putting in the effort to get. But you're just like, this is good business to be fighting over getting back Montezuma's headdress. I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing the designs. I'm with it.
If I was a populist regime, of course I want my people to be focused on what the hell's going on with Moctezuma's headdress and not what I'm doing to the Constitution. That's all I'm saying.
That's the name of the game, baby. And now that being said, let's continue with our celebration here. So, Luis, I've got a little big domino story for you that I have been waiting really a long time to tell you.
Yes.
This is really an exciting one, but I do want to say right off the bat, just for the record, a lot of the first half of the story is kind of disputed because it's one of those cases where, like, people didn't know this was going to be significant history later, so there wasn't a lot of documenting. And there are, like, a couple random people who came forward and was like, no, it wasn't like that. It was like this. But as far as I know, this is what happened, okay? So sometime in the 1880s, a teenage girl's body was found in the Seine River in Paris.
Oh, no.
And she was estimated to be about 16 at her time of death. But because she had no marks on her body, it was impossible to determine the reason for her death. Most people assumed that it was suicide, but they also were never able to identify the girl, so she became known as L'Inconnue de la Seine, or in English, the Unknown Woman of the Seine. Because no one knew who this girl was, her body remained at the Paris morgue unclaimed, and at some point, one of the morticians had a reaction to this girl's body that, honestly, in hindsight, should have been fairly predictable. Now, Luis, picture that you're a French mortician in the 1880s, and you're looking at the body of a drowned 16-year-old girl. What is your reaction to this? You got it. I believe in you.
My reaction, oh, wow. How fleeting life is. Such a young, pretty creature. But, payday.
You're kind of halfway there. The correct answer is, this is the perfect encapsulation of beauty.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
So, yeah, this is the reaction that this French mortician has looking at the dead body of the 16-year-old girl. And, I think part of it was that apparently the girl's resting expression makes it seem like she's very at peace and kind of like has like a slight smile on her face. But, also, like I said, this is a very French mortician reaction to have, at least in my opinion. All this to say that the mortician made a plaster cast of this girl's face and later used it to produce molds and busts of the girl's face because he thought that this was like artistically valuable. And believe it or not, Luis, this dead 16-year-old's head became one of the hottest home decor items in Paris for a little while.
Come on, dude. Listen.
It's just so tragic. So pure, so youthful, so eternal.
I always like to say the phrase, you gotta hand it to blank, but you absolutely never gotta hand it to the French. I'm sorry. Like, there are few moments when I think to myself, ooh, yeah, the French really pulled this one off. Really, I think it extends to Napoleon and also the guillotine, and that's it.
Luis, I think you just fail to understand that nothing livens up a cocktail party like a dead, unidentified teenager.
I hadn't thought about it that way. Thank you.
But either way, put a pin in all that because we're jumping to 1960 in Norway, okay?
Okay, big year for Norway.
So a toy company owned by a man named Asmund Lerdahl had just released the hottest toy of the year. Asmund's company had been experimenting with new synthetic plastics, and they just created basically what was the first version of like the modern baby doll, which was, as you can imagine, pretty popular. Now, after this success, a doctor approached Asmund and asked if his company could create a doll to train people in the newly invented procedure that he had created, which was mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
Okay.
So Asmund agreed to this, and during the development for the doll, Asmund thought that male doctors would probably be kind of hesitant to put their mouth on a male doll. So instead, Asmund chose a female face, one that he had seen a mold of on display in a relative's house. And whether he knew the origin or not, he had picked the face of the Unknown Woman of the Seine for CPR dolls. Asmund named the doll Resusci Anne. Now, obviously CPR is very useful, and CPR dummies are pretty handy for teaching CPR, so doctors around the world were pretty shortly using this doll. And when teaching CPR, one of the first steps is to make sure that the person actually needs CPR. Like, I guess, theoretically, they could just, be asleep or something and they're not dying. Yeah. But basically, in the English-speaking world, instructors would demonstrate this by asking the doll, quote, "Annie, are you okay?"
No.
And 30 years later, in 1986, Michael Jackson would write this iconic line in the lyrics of his song Smooth Criminal. So, Luis, the next time you hear Smooth Criminal, just remember that he only says, Annie, are you okay?
No way.
Because a Parisian mortician thought a drowned 16-year-old was the perfect representation of beauty, and Norwegian doctors would be scared to kiss a plastic man.
I'm out of words. Wow. That's so cool. Oh, man. Okay, Kurt, I'm sorry. You touched on a topic that I've been wondering for my entire adult life. And it's been a short adult life so far. But I've always wondered, why is Michael Jackson asking if Annie's okay? And now I'm okay. Hold on, I stood up for this, Kurt.
Oh wow, it's getting serious.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, I knew
Posture fixed for this knowledge,
Kurt. That's fantastic. I mean, I knew. I wanted to say that I knew that like CPR phases usually have certain stories behind it, and I had heard of the unknown girl of the Seine. But that Michael Jackson connection, Kurt, made me jump out of my seat. I'm sorry.
It goes to some weird places. I mean, it really goes places you're not expecting. You know, that's the whole domino connection of it.
That's fantastic.
I also think it's very funny that, like, the last domino story I told you, I think, was how the Nazis resulted in the creation of Mamma Mia.
Yeah.
So I guess it just goes to show that the music industry has had some strange origins, you know? If it were not for Parisian morticians and German fascists, we might not have some of these bangers as much as you don't have to hand it to them, but I hate to say it. There's a
So what I'm
domino
hearing
here.
is that there's a direct line from Adolf Hitler to Sabrina Carpenter. Wow, Kurt. That's a wild,
You heard
wild
it on
thing
this
to
podcast
say.
first.
My God. Stop.
Speaking of stop the podcast. Yeah, exactly. Well, we're a little too deep in to stop, so the next best thing is to just get out of here as fast as
keep
possible.
going. Yeah.
Luis, do you have something else to share with us that we can move on to?
I do. I have something to keep our mind out of German fascists.
Oh, yeah. Save my skin, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, Kurt. So you may know this, but as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, I did study journalism. I do love words. I love the written language, both in English, both in Spanish, and in any other language. I'm not going to discard any written language in any other language because I don't speak them, except for French. Don't care for it.
Would you have said that before you found out about the mortician thing, thinking the dead 16-year-old is beautiful? Or is that irrelevant to it?
Oh, absolutely. Kurt, you've known me for years. Of course I would say this. You know this.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted it on the record. I want everyone else to know. Anyway, continue, please.
But one of the things I really like of words is how you can mix match them and make anagrams. I love a good anagram. It makes me very happy. So, Kurt, I've brought you 4 different episodes of this season. Okay.
Okay.
However, I have anagrammed them into meaning something else.
Okay.
And so I would like you. I'm going to say what the anagram is. I want to see if you can figure out what episode it is. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I am going to follow the same format as our naming conventions for our podcast episodes. So it's going to be blank and blank. Okay.
Okay.
All right, Kurt. Number 1. Emancipatory hipster and massless earth cameos. What episode am I talking about?
Wait, emancipatory hipster and measles mask cameo?
No, and massless earth cameos. I'll give you 2 hints. It's from this season, and it's one of your episodes.
Oh, it can be one of my episodes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is really difficult, Luis. This is wild.
I'll repeat it. Emancipatory hipster and massless earth cameos.
I'm fully drawing a blank. I cannot think of it at all.
All right, Kurt. Well, I'll tell you. Emancipatory hipster is an anagram of the pyromaniac priest, which of course means that massless earth cameos is the molasses massacre.
The molasses massacre, of course. Ooh, this is a challenge. This is fun.
All right.
What's the next one?
Our next anagrammed episode is folk girl mimes and rectangle pirate acts.
I have to picture all these words in my head. This is tricky.
I'll repeat
Folk
that
girl
one.
Mimes.
Folk girl mimes and rectangle pirate acts. ACTS. And I'll give you a hint. It's from this season, and it's one of my episodes.
I think this is much harder than you're thinking it is. Okay, hang on. Let me look at the list of episodes. Or is that cheating?
I'll give you a hint. It starts with the same letter. Folk girl mimes and rectangle pirate acts.
Oh, if it's an F, then it's got to be frog slime milk and placenta cigarettes. Could it be?
You're so right, Kurt. Folk girl mimes is an anagram of folk frog slime milk, and rectangle pirate acts, it's an anagram of placenta cigarettes. So,
all right. You know
go.
what? In the spirit of this podcast, I'm not looking at the episode list. I feel like that's too easy. You know, if we flail,
Okay.
we flail for your entertainment, dear audience, on this podcast. So keep them out. I might get 0 out of whatever this is, but keep sending them, Luis. I'm ready. I got 1, I guess.
Kurt, remember this. I have no concept of anything we've recorded after we're done recording it. It disappears from my brain. So if you do need to look at our list of episodes, that is fine by me. But we'll go. I have 2 more for you. Ready?
Send it.
So what is the anagram of our famous episode, Begone, Elvish Stink, and Chatterton, Doggo Lad? I'll repeat that. Begone, Elvish Stink, and Chatterton, Doggo Lad.
Can you tell me the season and who hosted?
Yes, Kurt, I can tell you that this is one of your episodes from this season.
Okay.
Begone, Elvish Stink, and Chatterton, Doggo Lad.
No, I can't get it.
Okay, Kurt.
Luis, this is brutal. You're killing me.
All right, Kurt. So, Begone, Elvish Stink is an anagram of the Boneless Viking, which of course makes Chatterton, Doggo Lad.
The Gold Gland Doctor.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I can't believe I missed that. How much time did you have to spend on making these words up?
No comment, Kurt. You know, I have a fake job. All right, Kurt. But I didn't spend too much more time because this is the last one. So
all right.
Hopefully you'll get this one since it's pretty short, and it almost seems like it could be an episode in its own right. Okay.
Okay.
Because what is the anagram of downhearted Carl with a K, and Argentine Hope Harem? Let me repeat that. Downhearted Carl and Argentine Hope Harem. What is this an anagram for?
Could it be our recent one, the Naked Warlord and Orphan Menagerie?
Yes, Kurt, that is it. Yes. Downhearted Carl is an anagram. Downhearted Carl is an anagram of the Naked Warlord.
Downhearted
and Argentine
Carl
Hope Harem is an anagram of the Orphan Menagerie. And I want you to know, Kurt, I really like this one because Downhearted Carl sounds like the complete opposite of the Naked Warlord, which makes me very happy. And if you think about it, if you go real deep into it, Argentine Hope Harem is the opposite of the Orphan Menagerie, because the Orphan Menagerie, obviously sad, there's orphans, but with Argentine harems, there's hope. Ever thought about that?
And a menagerie is obviously European, while harem is obviously Western, American.
And Argentine is basically European, so
it all comes back. I don't know. All I know is I got 1 of them, 2 of them. I did not bad. I'll take it.
And I'm really proud of you for that, really. I think what helped you is me saying it was Carl with a K.
No, that totally did. Luis, that was genuinely brutal. And you know, it's funny you say you're talking about like how your mind goes blank of everything after we stop recording, because I think that we kind of discovered that after we did the first quiz way back when. That was the first Luis reactions quiz where I just played some reactions that you had said in episodes and then asked you the context of. And even though it was your own words, you most of the time couldn't come up with what it was. Well, I'm pleased to say we're going to be doing that again. So I've got 5 reactions that you gave on this podcast. And Luis, you will be tasked with telling me what was the context of these reactions. Here's clip number 1.
What? Wait, hold on. Quick interruption, dude. 1922 was a better time to be alive, okay? Like, you could get away with anything. Okay, Kurt, I think this is a sentiment I've had for the entire duration of how we've done of doing this.
This has been a common theme for sure.
It is, because I mean, we talk a lot about stories that happened 100 years ago, 200, even 1,000 years ago. Things were so much different back then.
Yeah.
Fewer regulation and just more shenanigans.
Yeah, and it does seem like we spent a lot of time in that time period in the season. But Luis, tell me, why is 1922 the best time to be alive? Is it A, because you could rob 3 banks a day in Texas? B, because you could sell cocktails with radioactive elements? C, because if your wife left you, you could kidnap your daughter and flee to Canada with impunity? Or D, because you could use the embalmed body of a dead outlaw as collateral for a loan?
Crumbs, Kurt. I feel like...
All of these things, by the way, possible in 1922, just for the record. Did happen on this podcast.
I do find myself, and I don't know if this is a red flag, but I do find myself every single time I say this, it's pertaining to a crime. Because I think just me wanting to commit crimes and my innate desire to commit crimes without being caught comes out. So I'm going to say rob banks, Kurt. Rob 4 banks in a day. That is my final answer.
And by the way, that number we're referring to is from one of our episodes where we talked about how in Texas, during this time period, an average of 3 to 4 banks was getting robbed every day until Texas decided to just make a shoot on sight and we'll pay a bounty for any dead bank robber policy. That, however, is not in fact why you are happy to be alive in 1922 in this clip. It's because you could use the embalmed body of a dead outlaw as collateral for a loan. Here's the full clip. James and Charles transport Elmer's body to Arkansas City, Kansas to be featured in their circus as, quote, the outlaw who would never be captured alive, which I guess is like technically
That's
true.
nice, yeah. Oh, that's good.
They featured him for several years until 1922 when the Pattersons used Elmer McCurdy's corpse as a safety deposit to get a $500 loan from a man named Louis Sonny.
Great. Oh, good.
And unfortunately, it seems that they failed to pay back this $500 loan, so Louis Sonny kept the corpse.
What? Wait, hold on. Quick interruption, dude. 1922 was a better time to be alive, okay? Like, you could get away with anything. What is your collateral for a loan? Oh, I don't know. I've got this corpse lying around. Oh, okay, yeah, send it in. Come on. Oh, man.
$500 too. You know, in 1920, $500 is a lot of money. And you're just like, I got this dead body laying around.
And you know, like, listen to me. I have nothing wrong with paying taxes. Okay? The problem I have is bureaucracy. If someone came to my door and asked me, hey, you owe me $800, I don't know, I will pay it right then and there. But when you have to do all this whole process, that's when I get frustrated. That's when I get stressed out. But then I realized that it hasn't always been this way. It could have been 1922, just a little over 100 years ago. And someone needs a loan. Oh, I've got an embalmed body ready for you. Does that work? And not being surprised at the fact that they say yes. Jesus. You know, I want to point out a couple things in that clip. First of all, I love how at the beginning I'm incredibly pleased. I'm very much like, this is kind. This is very sweet. This is
right.
Everything's right with the universe. And then you can see the moment where I immediately switch to, oh, this is not how it is now. And I immediately get angry. And not just that transitions into me being angry at bureaucracy, which very much tracks with, I think, the character I've made up of myself in this podcast. So it has a bit of everything, Kurt. It has a bit of everything. Because as we said, I am not someone that wants to do crime. I'm just acknowledging that it would be so much easier to do crime 100 years ago. Like I'm saying, I'm not opposed to paying my taxes. I'm just opposed to bureaucracy. Why do we have to complicate things so much? Ugh.
I'm not opposed to paying my taxes. I'm just opposed to paying them and not a dead body of an outlaw. Is that so much to ask?
Yeah. Come on. You kidding me?
Well, I will say, Luis, I was kind of curious about how you would react to that question because I remember when we did this the first time, I think the ones you got right were because, like I said, what did you have this reaction to? And then when I read the correct answer, you had the same reaction. So I think if you want to get some of these right, you might have to tap into the flow state. See
Yeah,
what
you're
makes
right.
you react in the same visceral way of you're like, oh, I wish I could be in 1922. You can get $500 for a dead body? That's amazing. But anyway,
That's
that being
so good.
said, let's try it out again. Here's clip number 2.
I'm losing it, Kurt. I'm losing it. I'm so invested. No one can see me, but I'm actually laying on the floor listening to Kurt tell me this story, and it's special for sure. I feel like a kid during story time.
Okay, Kurt, I know precisely what this story is, but
Oh,
please
wow.
give me the
Oh,
options.
wow.
Give me the options.
Well,
But
okay.
I know,
All right,
I know
let's see.
where I am here.
So, Luis, what's causing you to lose it? Is it A, learning about fox tossing, the 17th century sport that involved throwing foxes as high as possible? B, learning that an invisible cosmic laser beam influenced a Mario 64 speedrun? C, learning that Dr. Brinkley implanted people with goat testicles to cure pretty much everything? Or D, learning that the Baltic Fleet accidentally severed a telegraph line connecting Africa to Europe?
Kurt, I know for a fact that this is the goat gland doctor, and me being surprised that goat testicles are being implanted onto people's thighs. And you know why, Kurt? Because I was preparing to move the day we recorded this, so I was indeed on the floor, not because of surprise, not because of anything other than the fact I had all my stuff on the floor. So I thought best way to record is me sitting on the floor. And so that's what I did. And I remember that day. So my goat gland doctor is very special to you because it's one of the best stories you've given to us in this podcast. But it's very special to me because it was a transitionary period of my life.
Wow. So I just want to highlight that this was a story in which a guy basically implanted people with goat testicles or goat reproductive organs to cure everything, became an admiral in the Kansas Navy, which neither of us knew that Kansas had a Navy, defied the federal government by fleeing to Mexico, and basically was such a Wrigley guy on the radio that they had to make modern regulations that we still live by. And through all that, Luis, what you remembered is you were sitting on the floor when you heard it. Yeah, that's correct. It's Dr. Brinkley was implanting people with all kinds of goat reproductive organs. Here's the full clip. This is the moment when maybe John Brinkley decided that goat testicle surgery might just be the answer for everything. So he starts advertising his surgery as a cure for 27 different ailments, including, but not limited to, dementia, emphysema, high blood pressure, hardening of the arteries, kidney disease, mumps-induced sterility, and flatulence.
Nice.
So it's like, whatever you got, come in here and get this goat testicle, baby.
You fart too much? Here's a goat testicle.
And he also hires an advertising agent who starts a direct mail campaign promoting his treatment as turning impotent men into, quote, the ram that am with every lamb. This guy, come on. Come on.
Wow. Oh, jeez.
Now, this aggressive advertising draws the attention of the American Medical Association, or the AMA for short. The AMA sends over an undercover agent to Dr. Brinkley's clinic in Milford, and in the clinic, the agent meets a woman who is struggling to walk who had been implanted with goat ovaries in order to cure a spinal tumor. Now, as insane as this is, there's not really anything the AMA can do at this point, but this incident does put Dr. Brinkley on the AMA's radar, and specifically, it draws the attention of a doctor named Morris Fishbane. So remember this name. This will be important later.
Okay. I'm losing it, Kurt. I'm losing it. I'm so invested. No one can see me, but I'm actually laying on the floor listening to Kurt tell me this story, and it's special for sure. I feel like a kid during story time.
I'm very disappointed in myself that the fact that the first words you got out of me in that clip is ahaha fart joke. Honestly, I'm a simple guy, and I think you can tell a lot has changed in the last year of my life.
I guess so, Luis, but I don't know. I mean, the bait of we implanted a goat testicle to cure your flatulence, that might be so potent that I don't know that you'll ever be able to resist it, frankly. I mean, I like you, but
God, you're
That's
so right.
pretty tough. That's a hard one. Look, we don't have to dwell on that.
Guys, I want for every listener in this podcast to note the fact that Kurt just said, I like you. So I'm going to take that to the grave, baby.
We'll take the win where we can get it. And with that spirit, let's move on to number 3. Here's
true.
the clip.
Hey. Who doesn't destroy their society once every couple of years, right? Not everyone's in that golden age, and that golden age lasts only about as far as you start putting in. So ask the Romans. One of the few moments of censorship that we've had in this podcast.
I know. Well,
doesn't happen too often.
Luis, you'll have to fill in the blanks. What is sure to end a golden age, as the Romans well know? Is it A, putting oysters in women, B, putting the Pope in charge, C, putting lead in products, or D, putting the capital in Turkey? Tread carefully.
Oh my God. I don't know, man. This sucks. I don't know. I'm trying to connect to that flow state of me just spouting off dumb stuff, but wow, this sucks.
This is from one of your episodes, by the way. This is not one of my episodes. This is your story.
Can you say the options again, please?
Is it A, putting oysters in women, B, putting the Pope in charge, C, putting lead in products, or D, putting the capital in Turkey?
The problem is that
only there was an all of the above option.
Yeah, right. Listen, I really like the answers of A and B. So putting oysters in women and also the popes, right? So okay, I'm going to go with my gut here. I'm talking about putting oysters in women.
Well, while it may be true that you did mention the Romans put some oysters in women, in this clip you are in fact referring to C, putting lead in products. Here's the full clip.
Because this was around the time when gasoline still had lead in it. Okay. So they were trying to come up with alternatives to leaded gasoline. So the big feature of this car is that not only could it use unleaded gasoline, but it could also be powered with diesel fuel.
That's right. Good. For anybody who doesn't know, putting lead in gasoline was probably one of the worst things we've done to ourselves in modern times. I mean, we actually destroyed our societies a little bit by putting lead in gasoline.
Hey. Who doesn't destroy their society once every couple of years, right?
So true. The golden age can't last forever. Put lead in that gasoline, baby.
Not everyone's in that golden age, and that golden age lasts only about as far as you start putting lead in products. So ask the Romans. So I see you've tricked me. That censorship was not in the episode. Aha.
No, I wasn't trying to do that. I thought you'd remember that we didn't have you bleeped out in our episode. I guess I underestimated how much you forget when we stop recording.
You underestimate just how dumb I am, Kurt. Which is more than I...
But I also hold it against you that you think that I would bleep any of the potential options I mentioned to you. You think I would prevent you from saying we made a mistake putting the capital in Turkey?
It's an incredible bleep, dude. What is more profane than any sort of cuss word out there? Putting your capital in Turkey.
Well, that being said, let's move on to number 4. Here's the clip.
Awesome. That's amazing. Imagine that. Oh, the mental image of this is fantastic, man. Holy cow. Oh, that made me so happy. Luis happy. Take it.
So Luis, seems like you're having a good time.
Yeah, I'm having a great time.
Yeah.
Honestly.
What do we love to see? Is it A, Ivar the Boneless executed an emissary by force-feeding him wine and shaking him until he died? B, unlucky outlaw Elmer McCurdy accidentally stopped a passenger train instead of a train carrying $400,000. C, Marshall Ratliff robbed a bank dressed as Santa Claus and used his sack of gifts to carry stolen money. Or D, international conman Victor Lustig became known by law enforcement agencies as, quote, the Scarred, because his only identifying feature was a scar on his cheek that he received from a Parisian love triangle gone wrong.
Okay, so I feel like I was...
Tough choice.
Yeah, no, I feel like... Okay. I'm tapping into that golden hour of me being excited about stuff.
Yeah, go in the flow state.
Yeah, go in the flow state. And I'm listening to these options and hearing what makes me most excited right now. And it is option C, stealing from a bank with a Santa Claus costume on, because that is perfect. Honestly, that would make me very happy right now if you told me that was true. So I cannot imagine it not making Louise from a year ago happy also.
You know, I'm sure it did make you very happy when I told you that detail that the robber dressed as Santa Claus used his gift sack to carry the stolen money. But unfortunately, in this context, what you're excited about is the fact that unlucky outlaw Elmer McCurdy accidentally stopped a passenger train instead of a train carrying $400,000. Here's the clip. Now, somehow Elmer and Frank find out about a train carrying $400,000 in Osage royalty payments, which you can just imagine them seeing dollar signs in their eyes at that number.
That's right, yeah.
So, on October 6, 1911, Elmer McCurdy and Frank Gamble stopped a train near Bartlesville, Oklahoma. However, after boarding the train, they quickly realized they had stopped the wrong train. This was just a regular passenger train that they had flagged down.
Awesome. That's amazing. Imagine that. You stop a train and it's the wrong one. It's not like grabbing the wrong pack of gum at 7-Eleven, Kurt. It's a full train. Oh, the mental image of this is fantastic, man. Holy cow. Oh, that made me so happy.
So, before I tell you what they do then, Luis, what would you do in this situation? You were expecting a train carrying $400,000 and you're on the regular schmegular train. What are you going to do now?
I mean, frankly, I would probably, I'd probably be of the mindset of, well, we've already stopped the train. Might as well get something out of it, no? If the train does not have $400,000,
take whatever you can get,
that's
baby.
Right. Yeah. If it doesn't have $400,000, it probably has about 30 people, each with $2 each. Hey, that's rent.
That's rent, baby.
Dude,
come on.
Listen, if anything, I'm a utilitarian guy. Always thinking about what will help out in the end, and it's rent. Listen, I thought about 50 people with $2 each. Come on, that's boy math, and it's
you're the king of making the most of it, Luis. I'll tell you that.
God, man, that is okay. I'm gonna pause right here just to say, I oftentimes I'm a person that's very sure of himself. Often. You know this, but there are days when you're feeling down, you're feeling like your self-esteem is not where you want it to be. Maybe I should start listening to our podcast, Kurt, because by God, it's good. It's good. Everyone, if you're listening to this right now, thank you for listening to this podcast, because this is the only thing that's keeping me, from falling into imposter syndrome. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that despite getting it wrong, Luis. I got to say, I really enjoyed going back and listening to that clip talking about you saying if I just found myself on a random train I had stopped, at least I'd be able to pay rent. And now let's have one more try for you to recall what we actually said on this podcast. Here's the final clip, number 5.
I feel like I've said this after like my 4th beer, I'm prone to saying these exact words. Oh no.
All right, Luis, what are you prone to divulge while liquored up? Is it A, eugenics really does make a little bit of sense if you think about it? B, the U.S. government has no power over me if I'm in Mexico? C, that you have, quote, succumbed to the heathenist practices of savages and stripped yourself of any honor or decency? Or D, a rambling prophecy about how you must fight the devil?
I hate this because I've had all of these thoughts when I've been liquored up, right?
The trickiest part is that you do say all these things when you're liquored up. It's just which one did you mention on the podcast?
Yeah, it's the problem, because all of these moments are different moments in my life, but they occupy different contexts, right? So I'm not in the same headspace. Give me the options again, please.
A, eugenics makes a little bit of sense if you really think about it. B, the U.S. government has no power over me if I'm in Mexico. C, that you have, quote, succumbed to the heathenist practices of savages and stripped yourself of any honor or decency, or D, a rambling prophecy about how you must fight the devil?
This is so unfair, man. I'm pretty sure I've told all of this to you at some point while I've been liquored up.
Yeah, again, as I'm saying, like, these are all things you do say. It's just which one did
Christ.
you mention on the podcast?
Okay, I'm either between B or D, right? So B, the U.S. and Mexico doing their own thing, or D, me off fighting with the devil. And I think I'm gonna go with D. I fight with the devil when I'm imbibing. So that's my final answer.
4 beers deep, and we are ready to prevent the devil from overcoming us. That is correct, Luis.
Yes!
Here's the full clip from Margareta the Messiah. In the evenings, Margareta would come downstairs from her room to receive visitors, preach, and give prophecies. So she's going all in on the prophet testing now. She's a prophet. But I will say, perhaps not the most elegant one. This is an example of one of her prophecies. And I don't know the setting in which this happened, but at some point she just cried out, "Behold, I see the host of Satan drawing nearer and nearer to encompass me. He strives to overcome me. Let me alone that I may fight him." And then she started swinging her arms in the air wildly, like swatting at invisible demons or something around her.
I feel like I've said this after like my 4th beer. You know, I'm prone to saying these exact words.
Look, everyone's welcome to drunkenly prophesize in the privacy of their own home. I just feel like when you have a crowd of 10 people watching this happen and believing it, that's when it gets a little problematic, perhaps.
Yeah, right.
You know, Luis, I'll say it's easy to see why I really love doing this podcast with you, because obviously I love learning about bizarre history like, teenage Switzerland prophetesses, but it's just a whole nother thing to be able to get to tell it to you and hear what your reaction to it is. I mean, I guess I just want to say we've been in this game a long time, 3 seasons deep, and I still enjoy telling you ridiculous stuff just as much as I did the first time.
And of course, this was from our True Tales episode, which was Margareta the Messiah and the Playboy King. And you know what I hate the most, Kurt?
That's right.
I like to think that I know myself pretty well, right? Like I have a good grasp of who I am. But the worst part is that I think you have a good grasp of who I am also. And that makes me frank. Yeah, it is dangerous, man, because I at times I don't know what even to think about myself, but you do. And this is an example of that. Because yeah, of course I go fighting with the devil, and of course you would bring that sentence out of me.
Yeah, I think that's really the funniest part is that, like, you're joking when you're saying that in the podcast, but also, like, that exact string of words, there's like a non-zero chance that I could hear you drunkenly spout that off. Like, it's unlikely, but you could definitely say that while you're like 4 beers deep.
Oh yeah.
It's wonderful.
I do have a hard time mixing up my memories of you as a friend in good company, hanging out with you, and this podcast. And I think that's probably what makes this good and makes this work.
That's what makes it so special.
In any case, Kurt, how many did I get right then of this
quiz?
You
know what, Luis? I did you the favor of not keeping track because I know I like missed all of the ones on your quiz. So let's give you an A for effort, and I'll take the same. And what do you got for us next?
Last time that we talked, I shared with you interesting facts or anagrams about our episode titles. And I have not moved away from our episode titles because as I was writing these anagrams, I noticed a very interesting thing about our episode titles. And it is that they all share similar things. Okay? And I've divided them into 3 categories.
Ooh.
Okay? Every single one of season 3's episode titles share the fact that it includes animals, professions, or states of being. Okay, and I just want to go through each one of them because, for example, animals. Kurt, we talk about cats, apes, elephants, goats, moose,
right,
super horses,
Ooh.
iron horses, fox,
Yes.
and I open parentheses, tossed fox. So it's tossed foxes, Everest macaques,
Of course.
and also frogs. So these are all the animals we've touched verbally in this episode. Sorry, in this season. Now let's move on to professions. What professions have we talked about during season 3 of Unbelievable Podcast, Kurt? We've talked about governors,
Of course.
hangmen, doctors,
Right.
Vikings. Because if you don't know,
Oh.
Viking is a profession. It's not an ethnic descriptor. Priests, emperors. My favorite profession now, royal farter.
Oh, yes.
Right, so someone that farts
yes.
royally. Outlaw,
Of course.
Messiah, which I don't know if that's a profession, but I'm counting it because
is.
there's a lot
It
of
is.
responsibility there with Messiah.
Yeah. You got a lot going on.
King,
Right?
whistleblower, composer, bandits,
Sure.
police, specifically plague police, right? So they're not regular police, they're plague police. Conquistador,
Right.
warlord, and
Ooh.
finally, orphan, which again, I think it occupies the same space as Messiah. It takes a lot of work to be an orphan, so of course it's a job, right? It's a full-time job to be an orphan. So I've put orphan as a profession.
You know what?
Whoever
I think
considers
orphan is just
orphan to be
happy
an
to not
adjective-
be included in the animal category. We'll take profession. We'll settle for profession.
I agree. I was very close in doing that. But
I know you are.
now that we've moved on from professions, there's finally one column, which is, of course, state of being, which this differs from adjectives, Kurt. State of being is not an adjective, and you'll see why in a second, right? Okay. So, states of being that we've had in our season 3 episode titles. Cyborg. Accidentally fabulous. That's pretty good. French. We always go back to
We're covering a wide range of topics here.
We've got these next two, which are relatively synonymous, but there's still two different states of being. One of them being dead and the other one being boneless, right? So
That's true. That boneless guy had quite a temper, as I recall. He was very much alive, but yeah,
That's
you would
true.
think it's close, but it's not.
but it's not. And you know what? Dead also, it sounds synonymous to this next one, but it's not. Dead. Dead, not synonymous to corpse or boneless.
Oh.
So corpse has been another one.
We have to
We've
make all
got-
these distinctions because the dead corpse of an outlaw was the main character of one of the stories in this season.
That's true. We go on. We've got burping. We've also got traveling. All right, so we know those are gerunds. We've got
This is in the same category as dead and boneless?
yeah, because it's a state of being.
I
Kurt.
see.
So burping and traveling.
Inherently
It's a state of
burping
being.
or traveling.
That's right. That's right. And we also go to another two that almost sound synonymous, but they're not, which is mystical and also festive.
Oh,
Right. So another state of being.
right.
However, we do have Baltic in there as well. State of being. We also have on there scamming, which is really special, honestly. Scamming's really nice. And we've got naked, again, state of being. And finally, to make my point that this category is not just adjectives, however, they are how people are inherently. The final one on this category is spring break. Because as we know, spring break's not a noun; it's a state of being.
That's true.
Right?
State of mind.
And what I've noticed when I've compiled this list, Kurt, is that not only have I told you the animals, professions, and states of being that we've had during season 3 episode titles, but I've also given everyone a perfect, unbelievable podcast episode name maker, Kurt. Because with everything that I've just said, if we use those to make a podcast title, a podcast episode title for our specific podcast, we can come up with different titles. Like, for example, Cyborg Frog King and the Boneless Orphan Moose.
Ooh, that sounds good. That's really good.
Right? It sounds riveting. But wait until you hear the next one, which is Burping Cat Emperor and the Mystical Goat Police.
Oh, that's so good. This is terrible. I want to hear these episodes. This is distracting me from our own podcast, Luis. This is so much better than what we do.
It's the unbelievable name generator, frankly.
You're going to put us out of business.
I'm sorry. You guys have found our formula. I'm giving it out to you for free. Finally, probably my favorite one is French Orphan Fox and the Baltic Horse Messiah.
Wow, that one's tough because there's no way that the French did not have an orphan fox, but there's also no way that the Baltic did not have a horse messiah. Like, I'm never going to guess that one right.
But is the horse messiah Baltic? Or is it a Baltic horse that becomes a messiah? Or is it a horse messiah that's Baltic, right? It really gives a lot to the imagination.
You got to listen to the episode to find
French
out.
Orphan Fox.
That's true.
It's true. So there you have it. I've been really focused on our episode titles because I feel like people don't give enough credit to them, Kurt. And we spend a good amount of time on our titles. They might not be search engine optimized, but we have a lot of fun.
That's so true. Well, lastly, Luis, I have something that I've been waiting to share with you for truthfully quite a long time. I think since about like the middle of this season. Because I was doing some research for a made-up story so I could lie to you more efficiently, and I was thinking about a lesson that I had learned from this podcast, which was that, nothing caps off a great story about an odd historical figure like them dying in a ridiculous or strange way, right? So I had this idea while coming up with details for the fake story that why don't I just Google a list of weird deaths and then pick one for this character that I'm making up. And this is how I came upon a very wonderful Wikipedia page called, quote, Lists of Unusual Deaths. Now, while these lists are like pretty community contribution type of deal, they certainly leave out like a lot of strange ways people have died, and there's probably some on here that are not really exactly how they happen. But either way, there are really some amazing and odd deaths on this list. Now, I've gone through and chosen the best and separated them into some categories to share with you. So first off, I have general statistics. This is just where there were like multiple people dying in the same weird way, or the first way that someone died like this, or the only way that someone died like this. And then we have long story short, which are deaths that require a bit of context. And then professional dedication, which is people who died because of their commitment to their career or commitment to the bit. Freak accidents, which is exactly what it sounds like. Dying of laughter, which is people who died from laughing, but I only included ones where we know what they were laughing at, because if they were laughing and we don't know, I don't care, okay? I want to know what the killing joke was.
That's right. Yeah, of course.
Probably my favorite category, which is ways that I could see Luis dying. And then we have group activities, which is people dying in groups, and calamitous chain reactions, which is strange sequences of events that proved fatal to one or multiple persons. So, Luis, what do you want to hear first?
I want to see how I'm going to die. Kurt,
All right,
please.
let's hear about ways that I could see you dying. So the first one on the list here is Draco of Athens. Draco was a lawmaker in Athens. Big surprise. Apparently he was pretty good at it because in 620 BC, appreciative citizens showered him with so many gifts that he was buried and suffocated by them. Just for the record, not only is the accuracy of this story debatable, but there's some historians that think Draco of Athens never existed, so this could be completely a legend, but I do like the idea of being so good at your job that the appreciative citizens suffocate you to death.
That sounds like something I would do, Kurt.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Bit of a caveat. I'm not good at my job. Never been, never will be. And that's a personal preference. I don't want to be good at my job. I think that's my own personal protest. However, I feel like I would be showered in gifts.
Final answer. I mean, no, yeah, I think you got a good point there. Like, I would not picture, it's not because I think that you would be a good lawmaker of Athens. I just can picture you being showered with gifts until you suffocate. But anyway, second one here of ways I could see you dying Li Bai. He was a poet in ancient China, and in 762 he got drunk in a boat. He decided that he wanted to hug the moon's reflection in the water, which, man, Li Bai was having a good time. But unfortunately, when he tried to do this, he fell into the water and drowned. And that's a classic Luis death if I've ever heard it.
That's a modern day Narcissus story, you know? That is a historically verifiable Narcissus story. No, I was going to say, and who is more like Narcissus than Luis?
Very true.
That's what I'm gonna say.
Very true. So the next death, Basil I, was a Byzantine emperor. Now, during a hunt in 1886, somehow his belt became entangled in a deer's antlers. The deer then dragged him 16 miles or 26 kilometers, and because of this, he contracted a fever and died. And, you know, there's quite a bit of bad luck between these Byzantine emperors on hunts, because the next one on the list is John II of Komnenos, who was a Byzantine emperor in the 12th century. He cut himself with a poison-tipped arrow during a hunt and decided not to worry about it, but ultimately died a few days later. Then the next death is Molière, who was a 17th century French playwright. He was performing the lead in a play he had written called Le Maladie Imaginaire, which was basically meaning the imaginary malady. It's about a hypochondriac or a person who thinks they're sick when they're not. And during the performance, Molière had a coughing fit and began internally bleeding, but he insisted on completing the performance even as the bleeding got worse. Now, the play was supposed to end with Molière's character collapsed dead in a chair, which it did, and then after the play, Molière remained in the chair and was carried to his house, where he was later pronounced dead. And Luis, I think you can appreciate the commitment to the character there. But as much as I want to let you react, I don't want to break the momentum, because this next death is actually related to this guy. Because the person who was composing the music for Molière's plays until the year before his death was this guy named Jean-Baptiste Lully, who was a French composer and dancer.
Lully?
Exactly.
I love Lully.
You know this guy?
I do know this guy. I sang a couple songs of his.
Oh, that makes me so happy, because I was really hoping you were knowing where I was going with the story.
Yeah.
So Jean-Baptiste was also friends with King Louis XIV. Now, they had previously been pretty close friends, but apparently Louis had gotten annoyed at a certain point with the fact that Jean-Baptiste lived kind of wild, and also that he was gay. Now, mind you, Luis, these two men met when they were dancing ballet together, so this is not important to the story, but I really feel like Louis XIV should pick a lane. I don't know.
Kurt, what about it, dude? Ballet is a way to show that you know how to control your body, you know? If anything, it's the most...
Look, I'm not trying to label things. I just think that if you're Louis XIV and you made this friend through ballet, you kind of have lost the plot later if you're like, this guy's too effeminate for me.
Whatever, I'll give it to you.
Anyway, none of this is really important to how this guy died, but just to say that in 1687, Jean-Baptiste was conducting a concert for King Louis XIV to celebrate a recent achievement/process that Louis had completed. And Luis, as featured on this podcast, what process had Louis XIV just gotten done with in 1687?
He got some warts removed from his butt.
That he did. Louis XIV's butt surgery had been successfully completed, and so Jean-Baptiste was conducting some music in honor of this. Now, apparently during the particular piece he was conducting, it was custom for the conductor to hit the ground with his conducting staff at various times, kind of like a rhythmic thing. And one of these times, Jean-Baptiste accidentally stabbed himself in the foot. And he must have been pretty into it, because he hit himself hard enough for his toe to get a serious infection. Now, doctors told him that the foot would have to be amputated, but Jean-Baptiste refused, because he said if they amputated the foot, he would not be able to dance anymore. His gangrenous foot caused an infection in his brain, and he died shortly after this.
Okay. I wasn't ready for you to give me a very sad story. I thought you were going to tell me of how I'm going to die, Kurt.
You thought the story of how you die was going to be a happy story?
Dog, the story of how
I feel
die
like you're
is going to
just
be
proving my
epic.
point that you would die in a way where you're like, don't amputate my foot so I can still dance, and then die of an infection.
Okay, never mind. I get it. Yeah.
Look, this next one, Luis, this is to your credit. Maybe you'll like this one better. So this is the story of Clement Vallandigham, who was an American lawyer and politician during the 1800s. In 1871, Clement was defending a client accused of shooting and killing a man in a bar fight, and Clement argued that the victim had accidentally shot himself in the stomach when he tried to draw his gun. Now, in court, they had the exact same gun, and Clement tried to use this gun to demonstrate how the victim could have shot himself. Somehow, the gun was loaded in court, and Clement managed to accidentally shoot himself in the stomach and die. But apparently he made his point, because after this, his client was acquitted.
Oh, interesting. Why? Do you know?
Well, I mean, he proved his point that the victim could have shot himself in the stomach and died when he did the exact same thing in court.
Bless up. Yeah, that would be me. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, that's me. I'm not just hot, but also incompetent.
You're feeling it?
Yeah.
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 Now, Samuel Wardell was a lamplighter in New York in the 1880s, and this meant, and to be a lamplighter meant that when the sun sets, you would go out and light the gas-burning street lamps, and then in the morning when the sun would rise, you would go out and extinguish them. So Samuel can't really afford to oversleep with this job because, if he oversleeps, it's basically like leaving the oven on. You're just leaving like more gas lamps burning. So Samuel kind of came up with this clever contraption to make sure that he would definitely wake up. Somehow he rigged an alarm clock to a shelf, and it was set up so that when the alarm goes off, the shelf would fall. Then he put a 10-pound rock on the shelf, so when the alarm goes off, the 10-pound rock would crash to the floor and wake him up. And this worked pretty well until Samuel moved all of the furniture out of his bedroom to have space to host a Christmas party. And then at the end of the night, fairly drunk, he pushed his bed back into the room without really paying much attention to where he put it. The following morning, when the alarm went off, the 10-pound rock fell on Samuel's head, killing him.
Very good. I would do this.
You do have a lot of 10-pound rocks on hand.
It's true.
That's really
It's
what
true.
makes the difference.
People don't expect it, but I do.
Well, next is R. Stanton Walker. So in 1902, a 19-year-old named R. Stanton Walker was doing some very cool 1902 things because he was at an amateur baseball game with friends, showing off a knife that he had. These are some prime 1902 shenanigans. And as Stanton handed the knife off to one of his friends, a foul ball struck his hand, causing Stanton to stab himself in the ribs. Now, his friends asked if he was hurt, to which he replied, quote, "Not much," but a few minutes later he bled out and died.
Ah, good. Kurt, I'm beginning to feel slightly offended by this. I'm sorry, but I'm beginning to feel like a lot of these deaths are happening by incompetence or ignorance. And you're saying that you're cataloging these deaths as things that would happen to me.
Luis, I would never explicitly call you incompetent or ignorant, but I have no problem implying it. And with that spirit, the next death is Margaret Brown, who was an early 20th century children's book author. Her works included Goodnight Moon and The Runaway Bunny, which you may be familiar with. Now, in 1952, when Margaret was 42, she had surgery for a ruptured appendix. And a couple days after the surgery, Margaret was still in bed recovering. One of the hospital nurses asked her how she was feeling, and apparently the answer was pretty good, and to show this, Margaret kicked one of her legs up in the air. Now, doing this dislodged a blood clot that was in her leg that traveled directly to her heart, and she died moments later.
Interesting. Listen, you ever get too wild and die? Me too.
Margaret Brown certainly has.
Yeah, sure.
And speaking of getting a little too wild, or I don't know if you consider this too wild, but Zachary Taylor, who was the 12th president of the United States, ate too many raw cherries and raw milk on the 4th of July and died 5 days later. Which,
what an idiot.
That's not really like a weird death, I guess, but I don't know. I just like the idea of having so many raw cherries and raw milk that it kills you.
It wouldn't be me, Kurt. I don't eat cherries. That fruit belongs in hell.
Okay, fair enough. I got to take that one off the list. That's my bad.
Take that one off the list. We all know Luis is a fig guy.
And now last way, Luis, that I can see you dying is Gary Hoy, who is a Canadian lawyer. And Gary Hoy evidently was very proud of his office windows because they were made of a special glass that was supposed to be unbreakable. So Gary liked to show off to his guests by throwing his body against the windows. Now it seems on July 9th, 1993, Gary was up to his usual rigmarole, throwing himself against the windows, but unfortunately this time it resulted in him falling to his death. But I will say, let the record show that the window did not in fact break. When Gary threw his body against it, it just popped entirely out of the frame and fell to the ground with Gary. This is really a modern tale of the gods smiting someone for their hubris, if I've ever seen it. So I guess you can dispute it if you think I'm wrong, Luis, but I really feel like this could be you.
Kurt, you know my lifelong motto. I see all these gods threatening humans, but maybe I'm different. Maybe I'm just better than other humans. Maybe I'm
better
better even than the gods themselves. I cannot see how close I am to the sun if I am the sun, Kurt. You know what I'm saying?
You're making a lot of good points here.
In any case, whether I die from hubris or from old age, sadly, the world will have lost a star.
So, Luis, that was all the ways from the list that I could picture you dying. What category do you think you want to hear next? You need a little refresher on what I've got?
Yes, please.
So I've got left general stats, which is just ways that, you know, people were the first way to die like this, or multiple people died in the same weird way, or something like that. Professional dedication, which is people being way too dedicated to the bit. People dying of laughter. People dying of chain reactions. People dying of freak accidents, or group deaths, where people all died together. It's one big happy family.
You've got so many, Kurt. My God. Jesus. What have you been doing?
There are many delights in the garden, Luis.
Do you even have a job? It's my question.
I plead the fifth.
Okay, Kurt, let's hear of freak accidents that have happened just a single time, or maybe just the first time.
All right, let's hear about some wild accidents. Number 1, Luis, is Duke Jing of Jin. So he was a 581 BC Duke, king of a Chinese state of Jin. This is during Warring States period China. And after Jin had a strange dream, he consulted a shaman who told him that he wouldn't live to eat the wheat from the next harvest. Now, sometime later, the wheat was ready to be harvested, and the first harvest was brought to Jin because he was a king. The king then summoned the shaman and showed her the wheat, then had her executed for being wrong. However, later in the day, some of the wheat had been prepared in some way for the king to eat, but just before the king went to eat, he felt a bit bloated, so he went to the bathroom. And at this point in history, a bathroom is basically just like a hole in the ground inside a room. Frankly, you're lucky if you even get the room part. You know, most people are just getting the hole in the ground. But all this to say that somehow Jing fell into the hole and drowned, died before ever having eaten the new wheat's harvest.
So the prophecy came true.
The prophecy came true. And, you know, I will say as a little caveat, some of these stories that are way back in history, it's hard to tell if, like, this is factual history or just legend. And another story that's like this is the next one coming up, which is truthfully really close to my heart because when we were thinking about doing this podcast, this was one of the stories that you told me, Luis, that I was like, we know some wild history. So, Luis, if you would be so kind, will you tell us the tale of the death of Aeschylus?
Of course. For those of you that don't know, this is the story that probably made this podcast happen. Because I remember telling Kurt this story while we were still living together and still figuring out what this podcast could be like. But Aeschylus, or Aeschylus, however you want to call him, you fool, you idiot.
Fair.
Aeschylus is probably who is considered the father of medicine, right? Like the whole snake around a staff that is the symbol of medicine is the symbol of the staff of Aeschylus. But Aeschylus allegedly died by an eagle carrying a tortoise and dropping the tortoise, and the tortoise falling on Aeschylus's head and him fully dying.
Because he was bald, and the eagle presumably thought his head was a rock.
It's true. So if you want to eat tortoise, you want to break the shell that the tortoise has on it. So you want to drop it on a rock and whatever. So, you know, that's something eagles have evolved to do. But Aeschylus was unfortunately a little too bald for everyone involved.
Well, thank you for that, Luis. And now the next one on our list is Attila the Hun, who is another pretty famous character from history.
Yeah.
Attila the Hun was the ruler of the Huns and other barbarians who caused a lot of trouble for Rome during the 5th century. He's kind of like one of the famous villains of history. He only ruled the barbarian empire for about 20 years, but he, in that time, became known for his brutality and conquest. But you may or may not know that he died on his wedding night when he got a nosebleed in his sleep. So he started bleeding from his nose, evidently, and the blood flowed into his mouth. He then choked to death on it and died.
Sick.
Which is a pretty interesting way for like a Genghis Khan equivalent figure to die.
Oh, that's nice. We need more like these. Keep them humble.
Well, we're going from this very simple death to like a very scientifically complicated death. Luis, have you ever heard of the phenomenon ball lightning?
I have, Kurt, but I don't think I know enough of it to explain. So please.
So there's this very strange phenomenon that truthfully we still at this point don't fully understand, where sometimes a sphere of energy or lightning temporarily forms, and it can range from the size of a pea to several feet in diameter. It seems to be somehow correlated with thunderstorms, but we don't really know much more than that. Sometimes this ball of energy forms and then it'll dissipate on its own, But a lot of the times in history where this comes up, it collides with something and then has a major explosion.
Yeah.
Now, this is precisely what happened to Russian physicist George Wilhelm Riemann in 1753. On August 6th, he was studying a nearby storm in his home in St. Petersburg, and he was examining an insulated rod to see if it had been affected in any way by the storm. Now, while he was examining this rod, it discharged a small sphere of ball lightning that struck him directly in the forehead, and the force of this explosion was described as similar to a small cannon. The door of the room was ripped off its hinges, and another man who had been in the room with George was knocked unconscious. George was left with a red mark on his forehead, singed clothes, and his left shoe partially blown off his foot. He likely died on impact with this small ball of ball lightning. That's a bizarre thing to happen in 1753.
It's a good year. A lot of things happened in 1753.
I guess it's a good year. And now, Luis,
Yeah.
I think I'm going to kick it over to you again because the next death on the list here of freak accidents is Azaria Chamberlain, which, again, you being a journalism major, I feel like you're probably very likely familiar with this story.
This is a story, Kurt, of a person that was unfortunately blacklisted by history. And that is, of course, Lindy Chamberlain, who claimed that a dingo ate her baby. Lindy Chamberlain, she said, hey, my baby Azaria was actually killed by a dingo, aka a feral dog, essentially, in Australia.
Yeah, kind of like a midpoint between like a coyote and a fox.
That's right. Yeah. So,
And I think there was like maybe an extra level to it that like that it happened on a camping trip. So they were saying like a dingo like took our baby and then ate it elsewhere. Like it was like stolen by a dingo.
it's true. And the way she would say this story is that, okay, a dingo basically took my baby, killed it. However, unfortunately, Lindy, aka the mother, was tried for murder and convicted for murdering her child and sentenced to life in prison. Her father was also convicted as an aid to this crime. But it was essentially a sensationalist story. I mean, yes, a dingo ate this woman's baby, and that's not something to laugh about because a dingo is dangerous. D for dingo, D for dangerous.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. And like you said, Lindy was convicted, and actually her husband Michael was also convicted. Although I don't think Michael spent any time in prison, but Lindy did spend 3 years in prison before an unrelated investigation found the daughter's jacket in a dingo den, and they realized that this likely was a plausible story. And so now, in contrast to that extremely heavy topic, I have probably one of the more like comical deaths of the list here. So this is about a guy named Jimmy Ferrazzo. And Jimmy Ferrazzo is hanging out in 1983. He works as a bouncer at a topless San Francisco bar called the Condor Club. So, man, I feel like you can picture this guy already, right? And one thing you need to know about the Condor Club is it's famous for having a white piano that would descend from the ceiling for the dancers to make their dramatic entrance. So they like come down on the piano, but they had like this white piano that can be raised or lowered from the ceiling. Now, Jimmy's girlfriend was also a dancer at the club. So, Luis, if you're Jimmy Ferrazzo, bouncer of the Condor Club with an exotic dancer girlfriend, what are you going to be doing after club closes, after the hours?
Go home and spend some time with my girlfriend dancer.
Wrong. You got to get wild on the famous piano. So, of course, on this particular day, Jimmy and his girlfriend are having a little fun on the piano. Now, somehow they managed to hit the switch that raises it to the ceiling. And when they did this, Jimmy suffocated while being sandwiched between the piano and the ceiling.
Awesome.
That's a classic way for Jimmy Ferrazzo to
yeah.
go. In 1937, a surgeon named Benjamin Taylor was removing a carbuncle from a patient's lung. A carbuncle is kind of like a wart. Now, after removing this carbuncle, Benjamin was using an electric cauterizer to close the wound. And during this procedure, at this point in time, nurses would be pumping oxygen as well as nitrous oxide and ether into the patient's lungs in order to keep them sedated. Now, when Benjamin used the cauterizer, it ignited these gases in the patient's lungs and caused an explosion that killed Benjamin, the patient, and injured both of the nurses. That's a pretty bizarre one.
Nice. I like it. Big fan.
Okay, you like it? Great. Good to hear. In 2014, a construction worker named Gary Anderson was delivering some supplies to a job site. Another worker pulled up in his vehicle, and Gary leaned his head through the car window to have a conversation with them, and they presumably talked for a bit. Now, as Gary started to back away and pull his head out of the car, a construction worker 50 stories above them dropped his tape measure. This tape measure weighed only about a pound, but it fell an estimated 500 feet, then ricocheted off a piece of metal, fell another 10 feet, and landed directly on Gary's head. Gary died later that day because the tape measure had hit him at an estimated 140 miles per hour.
Would be me for real. Not gonna lie.
I'm surprised. Well, I no, I'm not surprised actually, but I was gonna say it's a real decision between the guy getting hit with the tape measure and the guy dropping the tape measure.
I would be both.
Oh wow, the duality of Luis.
It's just how good I am, dude.
Now here we go. Next freak accident. In 2004, Josh Hutcherson and his friend Francis Brome were having a pretty wild Saturday night getting stupid drunk at a bar. And unfortunately, at some point on Sunday morning, they decided that they would leave and have John drive them home. Now, during the drive home, Francis was leaning his head out of the window when John suddenly swerved off the road and clipped something that took off the side mirror of the car and Francis's head off from his body. John was evidently too drunk to realize what had happened or even remember that there was someone else in the car because he drove another 12 miles home and then went to bed with Francis's headless body still hanging out of the window. Now, pretty quickly, neighbors noticed, and the police arrested John later that morning, who was very remorseful and still very drunk. But I feel like that's the inspiration for the hereditary decapitation death. I mean, I think that's the real deal right there, right?
Listen, if we get
nice, okay.
If we get tragedy to inspire creative art, I'm into it. Is that a cancelable take?
Fair point.
I'll take it. I don't care.
And now last freak accident here is Stephen Wojtak. In 2015, he was helping his wife decorate his mother-in-law's tombstone for Easter. Now, apparently, if the ground freezes and thaws in a certain way, it can start pushing a gravestone up out of the ground. And this is evidently what had happened to Stephen's mother-in-law's tombstone because while Stephen was hanging a cross on it, it fell on top of him and crushed him. Unfortunate for Stephen. And now that being said, Luis, what are you thinking next? We've got general stats, professional dedication, and group deaths.
General stats, dude. I gotta leave. I gotta leave this.
All right, general stats. So this is where people died in the same odd way, or the first way that someone died, or the only way that someone has died. According to this Wikipedia list, 2 people have died from being cut by a rooster at a cockfight after they picked it up.
Guilty.
2 people have died from tripping and falling onto a knife in an open dishwasher. Are you going to make that number 3 for the cockfighting, Luis? Both of them even.
Yes.
Died from picking up a rooster at a cockfight, then tripping and falling onto its knife-like claw.
Yes. Yeah, that's me. Good evening.
In this list, many people died from falling off a horse and being impaled by their own sword, or tripping while holding something made of glass that broke and then impaled them.
God, guilty.
Several people died from a barbell falling on their neck while working out.
Guilty.
This should have been the ways I could see Luis' dying list, frankly.
Yeah, honestly.
Now you have to let me know if it rings true for this next one, because 2 people on this list did die as a result of eating their own hair for several years.
Yeah, guilty. Yeah.
Numerous famous people or politicians were found dead from strangulation or suffocation that clearly had happened in the middle of some wild sex act. Multiple people were shot and killed because they did something like pretended to be robbing a jewelry store as a prank.
Guilty.
And then here's a list of first deaths and only deaths. So the first political assassination with a firearm was 1536. The only credible account of a death caused by a meteorite was 1888. The first aircraft-related death was 1908. The first death as a result of a UFO sighting was 1948.
Yeah, guilty.
The first fan to die from being hit by a foul ball in a Major League Baseball game was 1970. 3 Soviet cosmonauts became the only people ever to die outside of Earth's atmosphere in 1971.
Guilty.
The first known death caused by a robot was in 1979 when a robotic arm struck a Ford factory worker in the head, killing him. The first and so far only fan death at an NHL game occurred in 2002 when a teenage girl was hit by a puck. The only confirmed death from a coyote attack happened in 2009. The first confirmed case of a snake swallowing an entire adult human happened in 2017.
Oh, guilty for sure.
And here's one for the future. The first death by a self-driving car occurred in 2018.
Ooh, that's close. I like that. We're setting the foundations for bad things to happen, Kurt. Big fan.
And so now, Luis, that leaves us with dying from our professional dedication, or long story short, deaths which require a little more context.
Deaths that require a little more context, Kurt, please.
Let's do it. So number one is this guy named Michael Malloy.
Uh-huh.
Now, to understand the death of Michael Malloy, I got to go back and talk about some other people a little bit. So in the 1930s, a New Yorker named Tony Marino discovered an extremely lucrative insurance hack, which was take out a life insurance policy plus murder.
Yeah,
and
no,
now
that's good.
we don't have any details on how he came up with this genius scheme or even how he planned it ahead of time, but what we do know is that he convinced a homeless woman named Mabel Carson to take out a $2,000 life insurance policy with him as a beneficiary, and shortly after, Michael got her drunk, stripped her naked, put her in a bed, poured ice water on the sheets and mattress, and then left the window open, which caused Mabel to die of exposure in her sleep. Now, it gives me no pleasure to say this, Luis.
No pleasure.
But if you easily get away with a crime, what's the first thing you're going to do?
Casino.
No, the same crime again, but more. Did you even listen to this podcast?
Of course not, Kurt. I don't pay attention. You know this.
Well, then it may surprise you to learn that Tony Marino is going to try to go 2 for 2 on his scheme. And honestly, the second time, it was kind of more of like a spur-of-the-moment idea because one day a friend of Tony's named Francis Pasqua was in the speakeasy that Tony owned. Now, Francis knew about this homeless woman's murder, and Francis gestured to one of the speakeasy's frequent customers and basically said to Tony, like, you should take out a life insurance policy on that guy. Like, he's pretty much doing the work for you. Now, the customer in question was Michael Malloy, who was a homeless man in his 50s and had clearly been a lifelong alcoholic, which is pretty impressive at this point in time, by the way, because they're 13 years into prohibition. So if you're a lifelong alcoholic at this time, you've been putting in some work. You're in it for love of the game, you know. Now, this time, everyone's getting in on the scheme. So Tony Marino, Francis Pasqua, Joseph Red Murphy, and Daniel Kreisberg took out a total of 3 life insurance policies on Malloy. This group would later be referred to as, quote, the Murder Trust by newspapers. Tony Marino started letting Malloy drink for free, and everybody in the group started trying to get him as drunk as possible at every opportunity. They even gave him a room in the speakeasy so he could sleep it off and basically just live there. And as much as they tried, this didn't really seem to slow down Malloy much. So Tony began adding antifreeze to his drinks. Now, when this had no effect, the group then tried turpentine, horse liniment, rat poison, and even wood alcohol.
That's good.
These also had no effect on Malloy. He just continued getting drunk all day for free. At this point, the Murder Trust decided to step it up a notch and get a little more creative. They fed Malloy raw oysters that had been soaked in wood oil. They also gave him a sandwich that had spoiled sardines, carpet tacks, and poison. Now, not only did none of this kill Malloy, but it seemed like it wasn't even really getting him closer to dying. Like, he's not even closer to the grave. It seems like, in fact, the Murder Trust started to worry about the fact that Malloy might not die before their policy ran out. So, one night, they decided to take things to the extreme. They got Malloy passed out drunk. Then they carried him outside into the cold and left him in the snow. They took off his shirt and poured 5 gallons of water on him and left him there. But soon after, a policeman found Malloy and took him to a shelter where he was warmed up and reclothed.
Yes.
Now, the following morning, the Murder Trust was shocked to see Malloy walking into the speakeasy ready to get drunk all over again. So they're going to continue with the extreme strategies. Next, the Murder Trust paid a taxi driver $150 to run Malloy over. And they assumed that this killed him, but they were unable to collect the life insurance policy, and they then discovered Malloy was in fact alive, but in the hospital with several broken bones. Now, finally, for good, on February 22nd, the group got Malloy drunk. After he passed out, they carried him to Red Murphy's house. There they used a hose and a gas jet to asphyxiate Malloy, and presumably the men collected their insurance policies, which in total were worth about $3,500, which would only be about $70,000 today. But because of Malloy's rough living and many recent near-death experiences, he had earned kind of a reputation around town as being a bit indestructible. In fact, he'd been given the nickname Mike the Durable, or Iron Mike Malloy. So police were pretty much immediately suspicious about the fact that Mike had this string of close calls and then did ultimately die, so they exhumed his body. And this led to the conviction of the Murder Trust, including Hershey Green, who was the taxi driver who was hired. He was sentenced to 10 years. The other 4 men in the Murder Trust were all executed. and Michael Malloy earned the nickname the Irish Rasputin. So, I don't know if we got the good ending, but it's kind of pretty good. We got some good stuff going on. Soak it up while it lasts, Luis, because I promise you this next story is the bad ending. This is the story of Thomas Midgley Jr., who was an American inventor during the first half of the 20th century, and one of the things that Thomas Midgley invented was leaded gasoline, which we have previously mentioned in this very episode about how terrible it is. If you don't know how bad leaded gasoline is, do a quick Google search. But in addition to that, Midgley also invented synthesized freon and other similar compounds, which is basically the stuff that was in aerosols and a bunch of other things that chewed through the ozone layer pretty badly. So he's really got quite the history in here. Now, in 1940, Midgley contracted polio and was left severely disabled. In order to keep some of his autonomy, he designed a system of ropes and pulleys that could be used to lift himself out of bed. But 4 years later, Midgley was found dead, somehow having been entangled in his own invention and strangled to death. So there's something tragically poetic about someone who invents things that make them rich and famous and they win prizes for, but destroy humanity a little bit, then later strangled by their own invention. And on this note of tragic things, let's just keep right on rolling. Our last story that needs a little more context is the story of Louis Slotin. So, the end of World War II saw the United States drop the first 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, called Fat Man and Little Boy, and at this point Japan surrendered, but had they not, the United States would have had a third bomb ready pretty soon. In fact, when the war ended, they had already completed a core for the third bomb, which was a solid sphere of plutonium about 3.5 inches in diameter, weighing about 14 pounds. Now, since the war ended, this core was instead used for experiments testing radiation, criticality, and a bunch of other fancy science stuff. And also the U.S. is like, maybe we'll need a bomb in the future, so let's keep it around, even though it's highly radioactive. We'll figure it out. So lots of different experiments are happening with this plutonium core. Now, one very frequent one involved putting 2 halves of a larger metal sphere around the core, and the purpose of this would be that radioactive elements are constantly firing off neutrons. If you put something around the core that neutrons can't pass through, then it'll start reflecting them back, and so you'll be multiplying the reactivity because you have more neutrons kind of bouncing around. And then the more you would enclose these 2 halves, the more neutrons it would trap, so you could kind of increase or decrease the amount of neutrons and then measure that. Honestly, this is very complicated stuff, and I don't really know if I'm describing this right or using the right words, but to put it in very simplified terms, imagine that this core is just giving off heat and you have 2 halves of a sphere that you're putting around it. The more you close it, the more heat gets trapped. But as you can imagine, if you sealed the 2 halves completely, then this would rapidly become extremely hot because there'd be no ventilation, right? And so this is why that it's very important that when they do this experiment, the 2 halves never completely close, because that would all of a sudden elevate things exponentially. And this is also why this experiment was nicknamed, quote, tickling the dragon's tail. In order to mitigate the danger here, the standard safety procedure was to put shims in between the 2 halves so that they could never fully close. Basically, there'd be a little partial barrier in between this so they can never completely close. And this is really the bare minimum here, because keep in mind that what they're not including in the safety procedure is that the way that the top half of the sphere gets raised or lowered is literally just a person holding it with their bare hand and moving it up or down. So in the ideal safe conditions, your hand is mere inches away from a radioactive core. And so now enter our main character, Louis Slotin, 35-year-old Canadian physicist and chemist, former amateur boxer, and known for his daredevil attitude and love of cowboy boots. Louis is the guy who is tasked with, quote, tickling the dragon's tail. And, as terrifying as this process sounds, you would also assume Louis would be pretty careful because the previous year, a brick of tungsten carbide had accidentally been dropped on the core, and this had led to the death of a former coworker and close friend of Louis. So he very clearly knows how dangerous this is. Now, despite all of this, and for seemingly no gain, Louis decided to ignore using these shims to separate the 2 halves and instead used a single flathead screwdriver. And you may wonder what could possibly possess a person to be this cavalier. Well, the thing is, Louis's been in the nuclear bomb game so long that he literally assembled Trinity's plutonium core by hand. Now, if you don't remember, Trinity was the first nuclear bomb ever detonated when the U.S. did test detonations. So, the first thing that happened in the development of nuclear bombs was this guy put together the plutonium core with his bare hands. So, yeah, I guess that he's, kind of an expert on it. But also, Luis, I want to send you this picture of Louis posing with Trinity. And I hate to say it, but he looks so cool. Like, I didn't want to condone this screwdriver behavior, but man, I might get it.
Oh, hey. Is he wearing short shorts?
So there's two guys in this picture. He's the guy who's in the middle wearing the sunglasses. The guy who's like, yeah, I built this bomb.
Is he?
You can pick him
Dog,
out.
is he wearing jorts? Is the only thing I'm asking. Like, I don't care about anything.
It
else.
might be in a pre-jorts era, but he's got the short shorts on.
Dog, he's wearing.
We got.
He is wearing jorts. You kidding me?
We've got the thighs out for the test detonation of the nuclear bomb.
Of course.
I mean, we're on it. We're vibing.
I'm really upset that Christopher Nolan did not include this in Oppenheimer.
Coward that he is. He wouldn't include this. But you see what I mean, Luis, where you're like, you hear on paper that there's like a procedure where you're supposed to be really careful, and it's even pretty dangerous on top of that. And then some guy comes in and he's like, I'll just use a screwdriver and figure it out. But then you see this picture and you're like,
I trust him.
Oh man, this is the
I
guy.
trust him with my life.
I hate to say it, this is the guy. He can do it.
He's wearing jorts. What else can he do?
And, truthfully, I think this is kind of like the reaction that a lot of people had to this, because in that point in time, like, who is going to check this guy? Now, to be clear, everybody who saw him do this was like, that's absolutely insane. Like, how are you not going to die imminently? But, most people didn't really say anything to him because, like, he's the guy. Mm-hmm. However, there is a note that Enrico Fermi, who you may know famously from the Fermi Paradox,
of course,
once watched him do this and told him that if he didn't stop, he'd be dead within the year. And it is worth noting that Louis did successfully tickle the dragon's tail with just a screwdriver plenty of times. In fact, this particular time I'm going to tell you about is the last time he was doing it. He was actually just demonstrating for the guy who was going to take over his position. So on May 21st, 1946, Louis was demonstrating this experiment of tickling the dragon's tail, and apparently for a lot of the time the sphere halves were like closed on one side because, when they had the shims it's like one on each side, but the screwdriver, you can only put it in one side. So evidently he's got like the screwdriver stuck in one side and the spheres are touching on the other side. This was not supposed to happen. So they're already like in kind of risky territory, but things got infinitely worse when somehow the screwdriver slipped slightly and for a split second the sphere halves closed entirely. Instantly the core became supercritical and released a burst of neutron radiation. Everyone in the room felt a wave of heat and a flash of glowing blue light as the air started to ionize. In the same instant, Louis used a screwdriver to flip the top half of the sphere off, and the reaction stopped, literally just in a fraction of a second. But the damage had already been done. Louis could feel his hand burning and had a sour taste in his mouth. Now, of the 7 people in the room, 3 of them died abnormally young, 3 of them died in their 80s, and 1 was killed in combat a few years later, so there's really no way to know. It seems that Louis Slotin absorbed the majority of the radiation, which was an estimated 1,100 rads. Now, to give that number context, most of the firefighters at Chernobyl got around 600 rads, so he received double that. Louis died from radiation syndrome 9 days later, and before this, the plutonium core had been known as Rufus, but after 2 fatal accidents, it was renamed to the Demon Core.
The Demon Core. Ooh. Who's in the council to name these things, and why have I not been invited?
I think that the entry requirement for this group is understanding the science. If you understand why this guy died, then you get to name the thing that killed him. I think it's probably how it works.
Hell yeah.
Well, Luis, I hate to say it, but I think there might actually be like more content on this Wikipedia page of unusual deaths than we can stomach. So we might have to save some of this for a future episode, but let's do one more to close things out. And I think that I'm going to go ahead and pick here. I think the right one to end this season on is probably group activities, where we will hear about people dying in groups. And the first one in this category is a disaster that you are very familiar with. Luis, please give us a rundown of what happened in the Erfurt latrine disaster.
Broad strokes. Erfurt latrine disaster. We're talking about early Germany. So a bunch of different states warring against each other. One of the main things they were warring against was land. They were not agreeing in what land they were going to have, so they all decided to meet in the castle of one dude. I forget which dude it was. Probably in Erfurt, if you ask me. It was in the Erfurt Monastery. And they decided to all meet in here, so every single person that was involved in this land dispute met in there alongside all of their retinue, aka their servants, their knights, etc., meaning that a lot of people were in this chamber with wooden floors, which is not exactly the most, what would you call it, structurally sound way to house people. And so after so many people...
And what was below the wooden floor, Luis?
That's a great question, Kurt. Once the floor opened up, everyone discovered that underneath the floorboards, there was a huge latrine. What do I mean by a latrine? I mean a toilet. What do I mean by a toilet? I mean feces. Everyone fell into the
large
poop.
Vat of excrement.
Everyone said, "Oh no, poop." Except for the main leaders of the Erfurt Treaty, which were somehow saved by rock. But everyone else fell into the latrine with a good amount of people dying due to falling into poop.
You know, one of the things I really loved about when you told this story, which this is, by the way, from the Mongolian super horses and the latrine disaster, was that, you know, whatever the original reason was that all these people gathered, we don't even know anymore. Like, we assume it's a land dispute, but that's just because that's like our best guess. So there's like a lot of people assembled here, and then the majority of them, you know, between 60 and 100 people die from falling into a vat of sewage. But the three people who were the main parties, the two people presumably disputing the land and the king, all survived. So I just love that all these people got dragged out for a very, you know, ultimately meaningless thing, and then died in a terrible
We love
way.
it. Love to see it.
And, you know, as to contrast with that, I think this next one, this is one of the few times where maybe the people who died were having a pretty good time at the moment, because this is 1518 when something very strange happened in a village named Strasbourg. Now, at the time, this was the Holy Roman Empire. Today, it would be France. But at this point in 1518, for an unknown reason, a woman named Frau Troffe started dancing in the street. And pretty soon, others joined her. They would all be dancing frantically, and they would only stop at the point when they would drop dead, seemingly from exhaustion. And this continued until, within a month, the dancing plague had killed over 400 people. 2 months later, it was mysteriously completely gone, and this is something that we've never really cracked the case on what happened. Modern theories range from a parasite to some form of mass hysteria to even ergot poisoning, which would basically mean that all these peasants were tripping on acid until they died. So, you know, it's interesting on one hand that this is such a strange thing to claim such a large number of lives, but then also that we don't have the answer for it. You know, we don't get to talk about history on this podcast very much that we don't have answers for, because usually that's a pretty short story. It's just like, this thing happened. Nobody knows why. We're not going to figure it out. But sometimes some of the weirdest history is the things where it's like, we really probably will never know why 400 people in this one village in the Holy Roman Empire just went out in the street and danced until they dropped dead. But that happened.
That's a fantastic way to go, Kurt, if I'm going to be telling you. Honestly.
Yeah, and you know, I think I'm gonna declare this now, because this is a story where you can like really, you know, get into the nuance of it, of like, oh, there's interesting medical theories, and if it was mass hysteria, is there some kind of like psychological thing here that'll, you know, give us insight to the human psyche? That's enough nuance examination, because the rest of these deaths are just absolutely stupid. The last one's kind of tragic, but the rest of them absolutely stupid. So, Luis, please join me. Let's turn our brains off and just get wild with this, okay? Because the first thing that is great is that we're getting a lot of people dying from mass amounts of alcohol in here. 1814, an event happened called the London Beer Flood, because a brewery called Moo and Co. Horseshoe Brewery had several large wooden vats of fermenting beer. Each of these was about like 22 feet tall, or 6.7 meters, and one of these barrels evidently burst, which created a wave of beer that broke through the wall of the factory, flooded a neighborhood, and killed at least 8 people. But if you thought that a flood of beer was bad, wait till you get to a flood of liquor, because in 1875, the Dublin whiskey fires happened. And in this case, the fire somehow started unrelated, but then spread to a storehouse that was housing tons of barrels of whiskey. It was an amount of whiskey that would be worth about 6.5 million
That's a
British
lot of
pounds
whiskey
today. So It's a large quantity of whiskey. Now, that's a lot of whiskey. And as you may imagine, when whiskey barrels catch on fire, they tend to explode. So this not only caused the fire to spread increasingly, but also there's a flood of whiskey now flowing out. The fire ultimately spread throughout a neighborhood and caused pretty significant destruction, and 13 people died.
Okay.
But amazingly, Luis, none of these deaths were from the fire. I hate to say it, but unfortunately comically predictable. If there's a river of whiskey 6 inches deep running through the streets of Dublin, people are going to drink it no matter what else is going on. So of these 13 deaths,
Open
all
your mouth,
13
man.
people died.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So of these 13 deaths, all 13 people died from alcohol poisoning, and another 24 were hospitalized. All of this from drinking the flood of undiluted whiskey that was flowing in the streets.
Big fan of this, honestly. I'm a big fan of urbanism. I'm a big fan of public transport. Anything that brings us closer to this.
Well, in case you hadn't lost faith in the average intelligence of humanity yet, let's move on to the 1900 Thanksgiving disaster. So on November 21st, 1900, it was a very exciting day in San Francisco because this was the day of an event known as, quote, the Big Game, in which college football team, the California Golden Bears, would play against the Stanford Cardinal. And by the way, I just want to throw out here, I did not misspeak there. Stanford Cardinal, singular. Just one cardinal.
Single cardinal.
The mascot, just one cardinal.
Yeah. We don't need more.
I don't know if it's like bird cardinal or Catholic cardinal, and I didn't look into it because I don't want to know. I like picturing both anyway.
And the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. But the point of all this is that the tickets for this game were a sky-high price of a whopping $1 for entry, which would be about $40 in today's money. Really not that bad at all. But despite this, some very clever penny pinchers figured out that they would not need to pay to watch the game because they could instead just stand on the roof of the glass-blowing factory across from the field and see into the stadium. So before long, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people had gathered on the roof, and you might guess what happens next, but in a way to pay true homage to this Wikipedia page of unusual deaths, let me just quote the Wikipedia page for the 1900 Thanksgiving disaster. Quote, of the hundreds of people on the roof, at least 100 people fell 4 stories to the factory floor. 60 to 100 more people fell directly on top of the furnace. The surface of the temperature, which was estimated to be around 500 degrees Fahrenheit or 260 degrees Celsius. Had people broken through the furnace, their bodies would have been consumed by the molten glass. Many of the spectators were pinned by the binding rods to the surface of the furnace, making escape difficult. Fuel pipes were also severed, spraying many victims with scalding hot oil. The fuel also ignited, setting many bodies on fire. Factory workers worked to remove bodies from the furnace using metal poles to poke bodies out of reach. So, this is a pretty high risk-reward ratio for saving $40.
You're asking for too much, Kurt. You're asking for too much. I'm convinced, man.
Now, despite this extremely graphic incident, the game did in fact continue with Stanford winning. In total, 23 people were killed and hundreds badly injured, and this remains the deadliest disaster in U.S. sports history. Now, next up is, as featured on this podcast in The Pyromaniac Priest and the Molasses Massacre, the 1919 molasses flood, in which a tank storing 2.3 gallons of molasses in Boston burst and flooded the city. Now, not only did this cause a flood of molasses, much like our previous flood of beer and also whiskey, but in this case, because molasses was so dense, there was this 10-foot tall wave of it that just basically obliterated everything it hit, like knocking whole buildings out of the way. 23 people and many, many horses died in this flood, and the cleanup proved to be comically difficult to the point that even after numerous different attempts, the neighborhood of Boston still smells like molasses on a hot summer day over 100 years later. And now finally, Luis, our last group disaster here. This one, not so much comical as it is, I guess, like tragically unbelievable. But in 1986 in Western Cameroon, there was some sort of eruption or tectonic disturbance or something. We don't know exactly what the inciting event was here, but it triggered something else happening in a nearby lake called Lake Nyos. So whatever happened initially caused carbon dioxide gases at the bottom of the lake to be released, about 200,000 tons of carbon dioxide gases. And these gas clouds shot into the air at about 60 miles per hour or 100 kilometers per hour. Then because carbon dioxide is heavier than air, it descended and covered an area around the lake of about 16 miles or 25 kilometers. And in case you don't know, you cannot breathe carbon dioxide. This will basically This would basically be like the same if all this area was now covered by water, except it's invisible, so it's even a little bit scarier. Entire villages and herds of livestock suffocated, killing 1,700 people and 3,500 livestock animals, which is that's a staggering number for something that happened spontaneously without warning.
For sure.
And I think that's where we'll have to leave it, because there's a lot of other wild deaths on here, but we've gone so long already, and I hate to leave it on such a tragic note. But I do want to say that maybe it's fitting that, we're actually cutting our season finale celebration short because we're running out of time to tell all this ridiculous stuff. Because I think that one of the things I was thinking about when we had this original conversation of starting the podcast, shortly after you told me about a tortoise being dropped on a bald man's head. Genuinely, you had just told me about that. One of the things I was thinking about was, this is a good idea, but what if we get a little bit into this and then run out of stories? Like, what if there's not that many ridiculous historical stories that are not well known, and we just simply run out of content? Which is why it makes me really happy to leave season 3 after so many episodes and so many years of doing this, where we're literally having to cut ourselves short because we have too much content to fit in the time. I guess I just feel very validated in being excited for the future seasons, because truthfully, you kind of beat the pants off me this season, but I really don't care, because there's always next season, and I know I've got way, way more ridiculous, crazy, hilarious, absolutely downright stupid stuff to tell you about. And I know you're going to love hearing
next season, I might just kiss Kurt on the mouth. Just
whoa! Is that my season reward or season punishment? You'll have to find that out in season 4.
We'll have to figure it out. And with that, thank you so much for listening. It's been a lovely 3 seasons, and it's been a lovely 3.5 years of unbelievable podcast. Kurt, can you believe it? A long time of us doing this. And for whoever's listening to this, we care about you. We love you. Send us a message. You know where to find us. In any case, we'll remind you. On Instagram, we are at UnbelievablePod. On Twitter, we are at UnbelievablePC. You can find us on TikTok at UnbelievablePod as well. And, you'll find us there anywhere you want to find us. Thank you so much for sticking with us for these last 3 seasons, for these last 3 years. It's been a jolly old pleasure, if I'm going to be honest with you. And I hope that we can continue to be idiots alongside with you for a little bit more time. At the very least, please let us not censor ourselves as much as we want to. Don't cancel us. If you're our fans, don't cancel us. If you are not our fans, please don't cancel us. That's all we ask.
This podcast, we're always walking the line between how empty can we get our heads without having to stop the podcast. And we've kept it going for 3 seasons, so I feel like I believe in us at this point. And thank you, everybody who's been on this head empty journey with us. Keep that head empty, baby. We're going forever.
We'll be coming back probably with guests, maybe not. We'll see. But in any case, we're excited to keep going with another 4th season. Big kiss, big hug, big love to you. Kurt, any last words?
Head empty, brain happy, barely sentient. See y'all.
Yeah, man.